The gunshot echoed through the canyon walls as Josephine Winters clutched her baby tighter to her chest, wincing at the pain radiating from her swollen eye. Blood trickled down her forehead as she urged her exhausted mare forward through the driving rain. The Wyoming Territory of 1876, showing no mercy to a woman on the run. 3 days had passed since she'd fled Valentine, leaving behind a life she never wanted and a husband whose fists spoke louder than his words. The baby, only 4 months old, whimpered against her breast, protected from the elements by Josephine's tattered shawl. They needed shelter, and soon. As darkness fell, a distant light flickered through the rain, a cabin nestled at the edge of a small clearing. Josephine's heart leapt with desperate hope. She hadn't encountered another soul for miles, and her supplies were nearly depleted. Dismounting painfully, she secured the horse beneath a small overhang, then approached the cabin door with trembling legs. Her knuckles rapped weakly against the weathered wood as she swayed on her feet, hunger and exhaustion threatening to overcome her. The door swung open, revealing a tall man silhouetted against the warm glow of a fireplace. Dust-covered boots, worn denim, and a holstered revolver at his hip marked him clearly as a man of the frontier. His expression changed from wariness to concern as his eyes registered the purple-black bruise encircling her left eye, the dried blood on her temple, and the small bundle she clutched protectively. "Please," Josephine whispered, her voice cracking. "Just one night. We'll be gone by morning." The man's gaze traveled from her face to the now crying infant. Without a word, he stepped aside, gesturing them into the warmth of the cabin. "Name's Dawson Reed," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "The bed's through there. I'll tend to your horse." Josephine stood frozen, unable to comprehend such simple kindness after months of cruelty. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to," he replied, already reaching for his coat. "You need help. That's enough." Dawson moved past her into the rain, leaving Josephine standing in the middle of a stranger's home, her baby slowly quieting against her shoulder. For the first time and longer than she could remember, something unfamiliar bloomed in her chest, the faintest glimmer of hope. The cabin was simple but meticulously maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn furniture. The air smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Josephine made her way to the doorway Dawson had indicated, finding a small bedroom with a neatly made bed, its quilt worn but clean. She sank onto the edge, her legs finally giving way. The baby, her sweet Emma, had fallen asleep, exhaustion overcoming hunger. Josephine's hands trembled as she unwrapped her daughter, checking for any harm that might have come during their desperate flight. The sound of the door opening announced Dawson's return. His tall frame appeared in the bedroom doorway, water dripping from his dark hair. "Your mare's been rubbed down and fed," he said. "She's had a hard go of it." "Thank you," Josephine replied, the words inadequate for the gravity of his kindness. "You hungry?" he asked, already turning toward what she assumed was the kitchen. "I couldn't impose, not imposing if I'm offering," he cut in, his tone brooking no argument. "Stay put. Rest." Josephine wanted to protest, to explain that she hadn't earned such treatment, but exhaustion overcame her. She laid Emma gently on the bed, creating a barrier of pillows around her tiny form, then sank back against the headboard. Despite her intention to remain alert in this stranger's home, her eyes grew heavy, the warmth and safety overwhelming after days of constant fear. She awoke to the smell of something cooking. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in Valentine, before memory crashed back the escape, the rain, the stranger's cabin. "Emma." She sat up with a jolt, only to find the baby still sleeping peacefully beside her. A soft knock at the doorframe drew her attention. Dawson stood there, holding a steaming bowl. "Hope you like rabbit stew," he said. "Not fancy, but it's filling." Josephine accepted the bowl with murmured thanks, suddenly aware of her ravenous hunger. As she took the first spoonful, tears sprang to her eyes, not from the heat, but from the simple act of kindness. "There's hot water if you want to clean up after," Dawson continued, seemingly uncomfortable with her emotion. "And I found some clothes that might fit. Belonged to my sister when she visited last spring." "Why are you helping us?" Josephine couldn't stop herself from asking. Dawson leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable in the dim light. My ma always said you help folks who need helping. Don't need more reason than that. He straightened. I'll be in the main room if you need anything. After he left, Josephine ate ravenously, then carefully cleaned her face and hands with the warm water he'd provided. The clothes, a simple dress and undergarments, were slightly large but clean and whole, unlike her rain-soaked, mud-splattered attire. Emma woke as Josephine changed, her little face screwing up with hunger. As Josephine nursed her daughter, she studied their temporary sanctuary. The room was sparse but comfortable, a chest of drawers, a small table with a basin, and a window currently being lashed by rain. Once Emma was fed and changed using the few remaining clean cloths from Josephine's saddlebag, she gathered her courage and ventured into the main room. Dawson sat at a rough wooden table, cleaning a rifle with practiced hands. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening at the sight of the baby. "Thank you," Josephine said, finding her voice. "For everything." He nodded once, setting aside the weapon. "How old?" "For months," she replied, shifting Emma in her arms. "Her name is Emma." "Fine-looking child," he said, awkwardness evident in his posture. "You heading somewhere particular?" The question hung in the air, fraught with implications. Where could she go? Who would take in a woman with a black eye and a baby, no money to speak of, and likely a husband searching for her? "West," she finally answered. "As far as possible." Dawson didn't press, merely nodded as if her vague answer made perfect sense. Storm set in hard. Roads will be washed out for a few days at least. Fear clutched at Josephine's heart. "I should leave at first light, madam," Dawson interrupted gently. "You're welcome to try, but you won't get far. Not with the little one and not in this weather." "I can't impose." "It's not imposing," he said firmly. "I've got the space and plenty of supplies. Stay until the weather clears. Then decide." Josephine wanted to refuse, to insist on continuing their journey immediately, but reason prevailed. Emma needed shelter and stability, even if temporary, and she herself was at the end of her endurance. 2 days, she conceded. "If the rain hasn't stopped, we'll leave anyway." Dawson's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Fair enough." The rain didn't stop for 5 days. During that time, Josephine learned that Dawson Reed was a man of few words but constant action. He rose before dawn each day to tend to his small herd of cattle and the vegetable garden behind the cabin. He hunted, bringing back rabbits or the occasional deer, and spent evenings carving intricate wooden figures by the fire. On the second day, when Emma developed a slight fever, Dawson rode 2 hours to bring back a woman he introduced only as May, who lived on a small homestead with her husband. The Chinese woman had examined Emma carefully, provided herbs for a tea to bring down the fever, and departed with a knowing look between Dawson and Josephine that made Josephine's cheeks burn, though she couldn't say why. By the 3rd day, a routine had developed. Josephine cooked and cleaned, determined to earn their keep. Dawson worked outside when weather permitted and taught Josephine to play checkers in the evenings, his rare laugh emerging when she trounced him unexpectedly during their 4th game. On the 4th night, as wind howled around the cabin corners, Josephine finally spoke of what had driven her to his door. "His name is Frank Winters," she said quietly, watching Emma sleep in a cradle Dawson had produced from the barn, explaining gruffly that he'd made it for his sister's child. "I married him last year, when my father died and left nothing but debts." Dawson sat still, his whittling knife paused over a half-formed wolf figure. "He was charming, at first. Paid the debts, moved me to Valentine. I thought." She trailed off, remembering her naive hopes. "The first time he hit me was 3 months after the wedding. He apologized, brought flowers. I believed him." "They always apologize," Dawson said softly. "Until they don't." Something in his tone made Josephine look up sharply. "You've known someone?" "My sister," he replied, resuming his carving with slow, deliberate strokes. "Her husband. 3 years she endured it before coming here." "What happened to her?" "She's in California now. Remarried to a decent man." He blew wood shavings from the figure. "Her first husband came looking. Once." The implication hung heavy in the air. Josephine didn't ask what had happened to her own husband's counterpart. "Frank will look for us," she said instead. "He's not a man who accepts losing what he considers his property. Wyoming's a big territory, Dawson replied. And this valley doesn't welcome men who beat women. The simple statement, delivered without drama or promise, nevertheless made Josephine feel safer than she had in months. On the morning of the 6th day, sunshine broke through the clouds. Josephine woke to find Dawson already gone. His bed, a pallet near the fireplace he'd insisted was comfortable, neatly rolled away. The finality of clear weather sat heavily in her stomach. She dressed quickly, fed Emma, and began preparing a breakfast of cornmeal mush and the last of the dried apples. She was stirring the pot when Dawson entered, bringing the scent of fresh air and pine with him. "Thought you might want these," he said, holding out a small bundle of wildflowers, purple and yellow blooms still wet with dew. "First ones of the season." The unexpected gesture brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "They're beautiful." Awkwardness descended as she placed them in a tin cup with water. The unspoken question of departure hovered between them. "I figure your mare could use another day of rest," Dawson finally said, pouring himself coffee. Road to town still muddy. Relief flooded through Josephine, followed immediately by shame at her eagerness to extend their stay. "I should pay you for all you've done. Don't need payment for being decent," he cut her off, a rare flash of irritation crossing his features. More gently, he added, "Besides, having someone else around has been nice." The admission seemed to cost him something, and Josephine understood suddenly that this man's solitude wasn't entirely by choice. "It has been nice," she agreed softly. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Emma sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Dawson cleared his throat. "Been thinking," he said, staring into the flames. "Town's a full day's ride. Might be better if I escorted you there when you're ready to move on." Josephine's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending, one of Dawson's, with a tear along the shoulder seam. "That's very kind, but," he interrupted, still not looking at her. "You could stay on a while. Winter's passing, but it's still cold for traveling with a little one." Hope and fear warred within her. "Stay here? With you?" Now he did look at her, his expression earnest. "I've got the space. Could use the help with planting season coming. And," he hesitated, "it's safer if your husband comes looking." The practical reasons were sound, but Josephine sensed something more in his offer. 6 days was hardly time to know a person, yet there was something in Dawson Reed that spoke to her of fundamental decency, a quiet strength. "People would talk," she said hesitantly. Dawson's mouth quirked. "Nearest neighbors are May and her husband, 3 miles east. The Andersons, 5 miles west. Not much opportunity for gossip." Josephine laughed despite herself. "You've thought this through." "Been thinking on it." "Yes," he admitted. "But it's your decision. No obligation either way." "And if Frank comes looking?" Dawson's expression hardened. "Let him come." That night, Josephine lay awake long after the cabin had gone quiet. Staying meant safety, at least temporarily. But it also meant, what? Becoming indebted to this man? Developing feelings that might not be returned? Or worse, might be exploited? Yet every interaction with Dawson had shown him to be honorable, kind, and respectful of boundaries. He had given her his bed without question, had tended her horse, had procured medicine for Emma, all without asking for anything in return. By morning, her decision was made. "We'll stay," she told him over breakfast. "Until summer, at least. If that's still agreeable to you." The smile that broke across Dawson's usually serious face transformed him. "More than agreeable," he said, and for the first time, Josephine felt something stir within her that had nothing to do with gratitude or practicality. Spring unfolded across the Wyoming Valley with a beauty Josephine had never had the luxury to appreciate before. The meadows surrounding Dawson's cabin erupted in wildflowers. The aspens leafed out in delicate green. Wildlife emerged from winter dormancy. Josephine and Emma settled into life at the Reed homestead as naturally as if they'd always been there. Dawson taught Josephine to shoot his Winchester rifle, nodding with approval when she proved to have a steady hand and good eye. She learned to tend the vegetable garden, coax milk from the cantankerous cow, and identify edible plants in the surrounding forest. Emma thrived in the clean mountain air, growing plumper and more alert daily. She began to roll over, then sit up, developmental milestones that Josephine celebrated with a fierceness born of the knowledge that her daughter was safe to grow, to flourish. Dawson, for his part, blossomed in their company. His natural reticence gave way to quiet conversation, then to stories of his childhood in Missouri, his time scouting for the Army, and finally his decision to claim land and build something of his own. Never expected company, he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Emma was asleep inside, having exhausted herself trying to crawl. Figured it would just be me and the seasons, turning one after another. Do you regret it? Taking us in? Josephine asked, voicing a fear that still sometimes haunted her. Dawson looked at her then, his gaze steady. Not for a single moment. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. As spring deepened, Josephine found herself watching Dawson when he wasn't aware the way his hands moved confidently over leather as he repaired tack, the gentle way he spoke to the horses, the rare but transformative smile that appeared most often when Emma reached for him. And she caught him watching her too when she sang to Emma, when she returned from gathering eggs with the morning light in her hair, when she laughed at his dry observations about the stubborn mule that refused to pull the plow straight. They circled each other carefully, two people who had learned in different ways that trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered. The first time Dawson touched her deliberately was on a warm May evening. They had spent the day planting corn, working side by side in comfortable silence. As the sun began to set, Josephine straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. "City girl," Dawson teased gently, reaching out to brush a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and Josephine felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the day's labor. "Not anymore," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. That night, after Emma was asleep, they sat closer than usual by the fire, their shoulders occasionally brushing as Dawson taught her to play poker with a worn deck of cards. When their hands touched as she dealt the cards, neither pulled away immediately. It was a beginning tenuous, careful, but real. 2 weeks later, as June began with unseasonable heat, Josephine was hanging laundry when she spotted a rider approaching from the east. Her heart leapt to her throat, Frank, before she recognized May's husband Chun on his distinctive pinto gelding. "Dawson," she called, and he emerged from the barn, following her gaze to the approaching rider. Chun dismounted before reaching the yard, leading his horse the final distance, a courtesy Josephine had learned was common in these parts, to show peaceful intentions. "Reed," Chun greeted, his English accented but clear. "Mrs. Winters." "Chun," Dawson returned, stepping forward to shake the man's hand. "Everything all right at your place?" "Yes, all is well," Chun replied, though his expression was grave. "But there is news from town. A man has been asking questions. About a woman and baby." Ice formed in Josephine's stomach. Dawson's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of questions?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "If anyone has seen a woman with dark hair and a young baby. Says his wife and child are missing." Chen's gaze shifted to Josephine. "He shows a photograph. It is you, yes?" Josephine nodded, unable to speak past the fear constricting her throat. "What did people tell him?" Dawson asked. Chen's expression softened slightly. "Wyoming people mind their business. No one has seen such a woman, they say." Relief washed through Josephine, followed immediately by guilt. These people were lying for her, putting themselves at risk. "Thank you for the warning," Dawson said, clasping Chen's shoulder. "He stays at the hotel in town," Chen continued. "May says to be careful. He has not good eyes." After Chen departed, refusing offers of refreshment in his hurry to return home, Josephine paced the cabin. Emma clutched to her chest. "I should leave," she said, voicing the thought that had immediately formed. "It's not fair to bring danger to your door." "No," Dawson said firmly. "Running now is exactly what he wants. Makes you vulnerable. But what if he comes here? What if he hurts you?" Dawson's expression hardened. "Let him try." "You don't understand," Josephine insisted, tears of frustration and fear welling in her eyes. "Frank is dangerous. He's killed men for less than harboring his wife." "I'm not without resources," Dawson replied calmly. "This valley has good people. People who look after their own." "I'm not their own," Josephine protested. Dawson stepped closer, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. "You are to me." The simple declaration silenced her. She stared up at him, seeing determination, and something else, something that made her breath catch. I won't let him take you, Dawson continued, his voice low and fierce. Not you, not Emma. Not unless it's what you want. It isn't, she whispered. Then we stand our ground. That night, Dawson moved his pallet from the main room to just inside the bedroom door, his rifle propped within easy reach. The gesture should have frightened Josephine, this tangible evidence of danger, but instead, she felt safer than she had since Frank's first blow had shattered her illusions of marital harmony. Days passed with no sign of Frank Winters. Life continued, crops needed tending. Animals required care. Emma celebrated her first birthday with a small cake Josephine baked using precious sugar from their dwindling store. But an undercurrent of tension remained, manifesting in Dawson's increased vigilance and Josephine's tendency to startle at unexpected sounds. It was Josephine who finally broke the stalemate, unable to bear the waiting any longer. I want to go to town, she announced one morning as Dawson returned from checking his small herd. He stilled, water dipper halfway to his mouth. That's not wise. Hiding isn't working, she countered. Frank knows I'm somewhere in the territory. He won't leave until he finds me or confirms I've moved on. And you think confronting him is better? Not confronting, Josephine clarified. Ending this. One way or another. Dawson set down the dipper carefully. What exactly are you proposing? Josephine took a deep breath. In town, there's a law office. I want to file for divorce. The word hung in the air between them, scandalous and final. Divorce was rare, especially in these frontier territories where women had few rights and fewer resources. Josephine, Dawson began, using her given name with the careful deliberation he always did. A divorce won't stop a man like Frank. It's a start, she insisted. A legal declaration that I am no longer his property. Dawson studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, but not alone, and not with Emma. Relief flooded through Josephine. May might watch her. We'll ask, Dawson agreed. When do you want to go? Tomorrow, Josephine said firmly. Before I lose my courage. The ride to town the next day was tense. They had left Emma with May, who had readily agreed to care for the child, her dark eyes reflecting understanding and concern. Josephine wore her best dress, one Dawson had purchased during a supply run months earlier, and had pinned her hair severely back, determined to present herself as a respectable woman with legitimate grievances, not a hysterical wife. Dawson rode beside her, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning the trail ahead. His presence was reassuring, solid as the mountains that framed their journey. The town of Pine Ridge wasn't large, a single main street with wooden sidewalks, a handful of cross streets, and perhaps 40 buildings in total. But to Josephine, who had seen only the cabin and surrounding wilderness for months, it seemed overwhelming. The law office is there, Dawson indicated, pointing to a narrow building with a painted sign. J. Holbrook, attorney at law. They dismounted outside, securing their horses to the hitching post. Dawson offered his arm, and Josephine took it, drawing strength from the steady warmth of him. The office was empty save for a young man in spectacles, bent over a ledger at a desk near the window. Mr. Holbrook? Dawson inquired. The man looked up, surprised. Yes, that's me. How can I help you folks today? My name is Josephine Winters, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. I wish to file for divorce from my husband. Holbrook's eyebrows rose, but to his credit, his expression remained professional. I see. Please, have a seat. He gestured to the chairs before his desk. Divorces. Complicated in the territories, Mrs. Winters. May I ask the grounds? Cruelty, Josephine stated plainly. Physical abuse. Holbrook nodded, his expression softening slightly. That is indeed grounds, though evidence would strengthen your case considerably. Would my testimony suffice? Dawson interjected. I provided shelter to Mrs. Winters when she arrived at my homestead with visible injuries. And you are? Dawson Reed. Neighbor. Something in Holbrook's expression suggested he drew conclusions from this, but he merely nodded. Your testimony would help, Mr. Reed. Mrs. Winters, your husband, is he currently in town? The directness of the question startled her. I believe so. We haven't spoken. I understand. Well, I can certainly begin the paperwork today. However, he leaned forward, his expression grave. You should be prepared. The courts often favor husbands in these matters, especially regarding custody. Fear clutched at Josephine's heart. He can't take Emma. He's never even cared for her. I'll do everything possible to present your case favorably, Holbrook assured her. But these proceedings take time, and until a judgment is rendered, legally speaking, your husband retains certain rights. The meeting continued, with Holbrook gathering information and explaining the process ahead. By the time they left, Josephine felt both lighter and heavier relief at having taken action, warring with anxiety over the uncertain path ahead. We should get supplies while we're here, Dawson suggested as they stepped onto the boardwalk. Might be a while before we return. The general store was across the street and 2 buildings down. As they approached, Josephine's steps faltered. A familiar figure stood at the counter, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, his hat set at the precise angle she remembered. Frank. Dawson felt her stiffen and followed her gaze. His hand moved instantly to her elbow, supporting her. We can come back later, he murmured. Josephine almost agreed, almost turned to flee. But something stopped her, the knowledge that running now meant running forever. No, she said quietly. I need to face him sometime. They entered the store, the bell above the door announcing their arrival. Frank turned, casual interest on his face that transformed into stunned recognition when he saw Josephine. Well, he drawled, his handsome features arranging themselves into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. If it isn't my loving wife. Returned from the dead, have you, Josie? Josephine flinched at the nickname he'd used like a weapon. Hello, Frank. His gaze shifted to Dawson, noting his protective stance. And who's this? Your rescuer? Mr. Reed. Dawson replied evenly. Neighbor to Mrs. Winters. Frank's smile widened, revealing teeth too perfect to belong to a truly good man. Oh, I see. Neighbor. And where exactly is this neighborly arrangement located? Frank. Josephine interrupted, finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. I've just come from the lawyer's office. I'm filing for divorce. The smile vanished. Like hell you are. It's already done, she continued, amazed at the steadiness of her voice. The papers are being drawn up. Frank stepped closer, his eyes cold. You think any court will grant a divorce to a woman who abandoned her husband? Who ran off with another man? Who stole my child? Your child? Josephine couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. You've never so much as held Emma. You called her a squalling nuisance and threatened to. She cut herself off, unwilling to repeat his cruel words. Frank's expression darkened. The storekeeper, an older man with a magnificent white beard, moved subtly closer, his hand drifting beneath the counter. Perhaps this isn't the place for this discussion, Frank said, his voice dangerously soft. Why don't you come with me, Josie? We can talk privately. Sort this misunderstanding out. There's no misunderstanding, Josephine replied. I'm not coming back, Frank. Not ever. Frank's gaze hardened, then shifted to Dawson. You think you can keep her? She's my wife. The law's on my side. Not for long, Dawson replied calmly. And regardless of the law, she's made her choice. Frank's hand twitched toward his hip, where Josephine knew he carried a small derringer. Dawson tensed, ready to move. Gentlemen, the storekeeper interrupted firmly. I don't allow firearms to be drawn in my establishment. Take your disagreement elsewhere or settle it civilly. Frank's hand stilled. His gaze swept from Dawson to Josephine, calculating. This isn't over, he said finally. Not by a long shot. He tipped his hat with mocking politeness. Enjoy your neighborly arrangement while it lasts, Josie. With that, he strode from the store, the bell jangling discordantly in his wake. Josephine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knees felt suddenly weak, and she reached for the counter to steady herself. You all right, madam? The storekeeper asked kindly. Yes, thank you, she managed. Old Tom Sanders. The man introduced himself, extending a weathered hand. Known Dawson here since he settled in the valley. Any friend of his is welcome in my store. Josephine shook his hand gratefully. Josephine Winters. Thank you for intervening. Seemed prudent, Sanders replied with a shrewd glance at Dawson. That fella's been asking questions all over town, not making many friends with his manner. He won't give up easily, Josephine said quietly. Few men do when their pride's at stake, Sanders agreed. But Pine Ridge looks after its own. Word spread about a woman and child needing protection. Folks have drawn their conclusions. Once again, Josephine was struck by the simple kindness of these frontier people, their willingness to close ranks around someone they'd never met, based solely on Dawson's vouching for her. They completed their shopping quickly, eager to return to Emma and the relative safety of the homestead. As they mounted their horses, Josephine noticed Dawson scanning the street with heightened vigilance. "He'll follow us," she said, stating what they both knew. "Let him," Dawson replied grimly. "He'll find more than he bargained for." The ride back was tense, both of them constantly checking behind them for pursuit. But they reached May's cabin unmolested, finding Emma contentedly playing with wooden blocks Chun had carved for her. "There was trouble?" May asked perceptively, noting their strained expressions. "Her husband is in town," Dawson confirmed. "We encountered him." May's dark eyes flashed. "He comes here, he will regret it. Valley people protect each other." It was the second time Josephine had heard such a declaration, and it warmed her heart even as fear for these good people's safety gnawed at her. They reached the homestead by dusk, the familiar sight of the cabin bringing both relief and new anxiety. If Frank followed, this peaceful place would become a battleground. "I'll take first watch," Dawson said as they settled Emma for the night. "You rest." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering." That night, as Josephine lay beside Emma's cradle, listening to Dawson's steady footsteps on the porch, she confronted a truth she had been avoiding. Her feelings for this quiet, honorable man had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. Somewhere between that first rainy night and today, she had fallen in love with Dawson Reed. The realization should have frightened her. Love had been a trap before, a sweet poison that had nearly destroyed her. But this was different. Dawson had never asked for anything in return for his kindness. He had given her space, respect, and eventually, a partnership of equals. Sleep eluded her as she turned these thoughts over in her mind. Near midnight, she rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. Dawson sat in a rocking chair, rifle across his knees, gazing out at the moonlit meadow. He turned at her approach, concern immediately evident. "Everything all right?" "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, settling into the second chair. "Too much thinking." Silence stretched between them, comfortable despite the circumstances. "I'm sorry," Josephine finally said. Dawson looked at her, puzzled. "For what? Bringing this to your door? You had peace here before us." "Peace isn't the same as happiness," he replied simply. The words hung in the night air, weighted with meaning. Josephine's heart beat faster. "What happens after?" she asked softly. "If the divorce is granted? If Frank gives up?" Dawson's gaze returned to the darkness beyond the porch. "What do you want to happen?" "I want," Josephine began, then faltered, courage deserting her. Dawson turned to face her fully, his expression open in a way she rarely saw. "Josephine, tell me what you want." "This," she whispered. "You. Us. A life here together." The words, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. Josephine held her breath, terrified she had misread everything, that Dawson's kindness had been just that kindness, not love. Dawson set the rifle carefully aside and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I've wanted to ask," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I feared it was too soon, that you needed time." "I've had time," Josephine replied, her voice stronger now. "Enough to know my own heart." Dawson's hands tightened on hers. "I love you," he said simply. "You and Emma both. Have for months now." Joy bloomed in Josephine's chest, bright and unfamiliar. "I love you too." In the silver moonlight, Dawson leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, asking permission even now. Josephine closed the distance between them, sealing their declaration with a kiss that held promise, tenderness, and the first stirrings of passion. When they separated, Dawson's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "We'll face whatever comes," he vowed. "Together." "Together," Josephine agreed. The confrontation they feared didn't come that night, nor the next. Days stretched into a week, then two. Holbrook sent word that the divorce petition had been filed with the territorial court, but the process would take time. Frank remained in town, a shadow over their happiness, but increasingly a distant one. Life at the homestead settled back into its rhythm. Summer bloomed across the valley, bringing long days of work interspersed with sweet moments of growing intimacy. Dawson and Josephine now shared the bedroom, though propriety and their own sense of timing kept them from fully expressing their feelings. There would be time for that, they both felt, when Josephine was truly free. Emma thrived, taking her first steps across the cabin floor to Dawson's waiting arms, a moment that brought tears to both adults' eyes. She began forming words, Mama first, then, to Dawson's evident delight, Daw for his name. July brought sweltering heat and the first whispers of possible resolution. Chin arrived one afternoon with news Frank Winters had been seen boarding the eastbound stage, his belongings packed. Could be a trick, Dawson cautioned, unwilling to celebrate prematurely. May thinks not, Chin replied. He lost money gambling. Had argument with hotel owner over bill. That sounds like Frank, Josephine acknowledged. He never could resist a card game, and he hates paying debts. Still, they maintained their vigilance. Dawson continued to make improvements to the cabin that also served as fortifications, new shutters that could be barred from inside, a sturdier door, a small root cellar that could double as a hiding place if needed. August arrived with no further sign of Frank. Holbrook sent word that the divorce proceedings were progressing favorably. Frank's failure to appear at a scheduled hearing had strengthened Josephine's case considerably. He's really gone, Josephine said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Emma slept inside, exhausted from a day of toddling exploration. Seems that way, Dawson agreed cautiously. I can hardly believe it, she admitted. I've been looking over my shoulder for so long. Dawson took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. You're safe here, both of you. Josephine leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. I know. The letter arrived in late September, carried by a freckle-faced boy who worked for the stagecoach office and occasionally delivered mail to the outlying homesteads for extra coin. Josephine's hands trembled as she opened the official-looking envelope bearing Holbrook's return address. Dawson stood beside her, a steadying presence as she unfolded the document. The court has granted, she read aloud, then stopped, emotion choking her voice. It's done? Dawson asked softly. Josephine nodded, tears blurring her vision. I'm free. Dawson gathered her into his arms, holding her as joy and relief poured out in a flood of tears. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she found him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it nearly undid her again. I have something to ask you, he said, reaching into his pocket. Been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He withdrew a small object that caught the afternoon light, a ring. Simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small, perfect pearl. Josephine Winters, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making this family we've built official in the eyes of God and the law? Josephine's heart felt too full for her chest, happiness expanding until she thought she might burst with it. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Dawson Reed. Nothing would make me happier. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it sat as if it had always belonged there. It was my mother's, he explained. She made me promise I'd only give it to a woman worthy of it. A woman I loved with my whole heart. And do you? Josephine asked, suddenly needing to hear the words again. Love you with my whole heart. Dawson smiled, the rare, full smile that transformed his entire face. Since the moment you stood in my doorway, protecting your daughter with everything you had left in you. You're the bravest person I've ever known, Josephine. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Their kiss sealed the promise, tender at first, then deepening with the passion they'd held in check for so long. When they finally parted, breathless, the world seemed somehow brighter, more vivid. When Josephine asked, her fingers tracing the lines of his face as if memorizing him. As soon as you wish, Dawson replied. The circuit preacher comes through in 2 weeks. Or we could wait for spring, have a proper celebration. 2 weeks, Josephine decided immediately. I don't want to wait a day longer than necessary. Dawson laughed, the sound of pure joy. 2 weeks it is. Word spread quickly through the scattered homesteads of the valley. The wedding of Dawson Reed and Josephine Winters became something of an event, the first celebration since the spring planting festival. and one carrying particular significance given the circumstances of their meeting. May and the other women of the valley descended on the cabin in the days before the ceremony, bringing food, flowers, and a wedding dress that had belonged to Mrs. Anderson's daughter, altered to fit Josephine's slighter frame. The men came too, helping Dawson with last-minute improvements to the cabin and barn, ensuring everything was perfect for the bride. The day dawned clear and cool, autumn painting the aspens gold against the evergreen backdrop. The ceremony itself was simple, held in the meadow beside the cabin, with Emma toddling between her mother and soon-to-be stepfather, occasionally being scooped up by one or the other during the preacher's words. I, Dawson James Reed, take thee, Josephine Eleanor Winters, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Dawson recited, his voice clear and unwavering as he looked into Josephine's eyes. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Josephine repeated the vows, her voice trembled only slightly. This marriage, she knew with bone-deep certainty, would be everything her first was not built on respect, kindness, and genuine love. By the power vested in me, the preacher concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The small gathering of neighbors erupted in cheers as Dawson kissed his bride, Emma clapping her little hands in delight between them. The celebration lasted well into the evening, food and drink flowing freely, music provided by Chin's surprisingly skillful fiddle playing, and dancing in the yard cleared for the occasion. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Happy, Mrs. Reed? Dawson asked as they swayed together to a slow melody, Emma having finally succumbed to exhaustion in May's arms. Happier than I ever thought possible, Josephine replied truthfully. And you, Mr. Reed? Any regrets about the woman with a black eye and a baby who knocked on your door? Dawson's arms tightened around her. Only that I can't go back and spare you the pain that brought you to me. But I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never know that kind of suffering again. As the last guest departed, calling good wishes and knowing winks, Josephine and Dawson stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. Welcome home, Dawson murmured against her hair. I've been home since that first night, Josephine replied softly. I just didn't know it yet. That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, there was tenderness, passion, and a sense of rightness that brought tears to Josephine's eyes. This was what love was meant to be, gentle yet powerful, giving rather than taking, healing rather than harming. Winter settled over the valley, blanketing the Reed homestead in pristine white. Inside the cabin, warmth prevailed not just from the crackling fire, but from the love that filled every corner. Emma grew and thrived, now confidently calling Dawson Papa, a title that never failed to bring a look of wonder to his face. Spring returned, bringing with it renewal and unexpected news. As the first wildflowers began to peek through the melting snow, Josephine confirmed what she had suspected for weeks: she was carrying Dawson's child. A baby, he repeated when she told him, his expression a mixture of joy and disbelief. We're having a baby? Come autumn, Josephine confirmed, laughing as he lifted her and spun her around the kitchen. Careful, I'm already feeling queasy enough without spinning. He set her down immediately, his hands gentle on her waist. Are you all right? Do you need to sit? I'll fetch May. Dawson, Josephine interrupted, amused by his sudden panic. I'm fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my baby, he replied seriously. Not our baby. The words warmed her heart. Our baby, she echoed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Emma will have a brother or sister. She'll be a wonderful big sister, Dawson said confidently. Just as you're a wonderful mother. As Josephine's pregnancy progressed, so did the homestead's prosperity. The summer brought abundant crops. The cattle herd increased with healthy calves, and Dawson's carpentry skills honed during the long winter evenings began to attract commissions from neighboring homesteads and even from town. We should expand the cabin, he suggested one evening as they discussed names for the coming child. Add another bedroom for the children. Maybe a proper sitting room for you. For us, Josephine corrected gently. This is our home, Dawson. Not just mine or yours. His smile was tender as he laid a hand on her now rounded belly. Our home. For our family. The improvements began immediately, with help from neighbors and friends who had become like extended family. By the time autumn's chill returned to the air, the cabin had nearly doubled in size, with comfortable rooms for the growing family and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. When Josephine's labor began on a crisp October morning, Dawson rode for May with a speed that left even his experienced gelding winded. He returned to find Emma, helping Josephine breathe through contractions, the little girl solemnly counting as her mother had taught her. "Papa," Emma cried when he burst through the door. "Mama's having the baby." "So I see, little one," he replied, kneeling beside the bed where Josephine lay. "You're being very brave, both of you." "I'm fine," Josephine assured him, though her face was pale with pain. "The baby's coming faster than Emma did." May arrived shortly after, shooing Dawson and Emma to the kitchen with firm instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. For hours, Dawson paced, entertaining Emma with stories while straining to hear what was happening in the bedroom. When a lusty cry finally pierced the air, he froze mid-sentence, his heart pounding. Moments later, May appeared in the doorway, her face tired but smiling. "A son," she announced. "Strong and healthy. Come." Dawson lifted Emma into his arms and followed May, his legs suddenly unsteady. The sight that greeted him would remain etched in his memory forever. Josephine, exhausted but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in the quilt his mother had made decades ago. "Dawson," she said, looking up with tears of joy in her eyes, "meet your son." He approached the bed almost reverently, setting Emma down beside her mother. The child immediately peered at the red-faced infant with fascination. "Baby brother?" she asked, reaching out a careful finger to touch the downy head. "Yes, sweetheart," Josephine confirmed. "Your baby brother, James." Dawson's head jerked up at the name, his middle name, his father's name before him. Josephine smiled at his reaction. "James Dawson Reed," she continued. "If that's all right with you?" "It's perfect," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "He's perfect. You're perfect." Carefully, he sat on the edge of the bed, gathering his family close: Josephine, Emma, and now little James. Four hearts beating together in the home that had begun with a desperate knock on a stormy night. 5 years later, the Reed homestead had grown into one of the most prosperous in the valley. The original cabin remained at its heart, though expanded and improved until it resembled a proper house. A thriving vegetable garden, orchard, and enlarged barn spoke to the family's industry and success. Josephine stood on the porch, watching Dawson teaching 7-year-old Emma to ride her new pony, a birthday gift he had spent months training to be gentle enough for a child. James, now 4, raced around them in excited circles, begging for his turn. 2-year-old Sarah toddled at Josephine's feet, clutching her skirts with one hand and a wooden horse Dawson had carved with the other. "Careful, Emma," Josephine called as the girl bounced enthusiastically in the saddle. "Remember what Papa taught you about holding the reins." Emma adjusted her grip, shooting a triumphant grin at her mother. Dawson looked up, catching Josephine's eye with a smile that still, after all these years, made her heart skip. Later that evening, with the children finally asleep after stories and songs, Josephine and Dawson sat on the porch swing he had built the previous summer. The valley stretched before them, bathed in moonlight, peaceful and eternal. "I got a letter from Holbrook today," Dawson said, his arm around her shoulders. "Frank Winters died in Denver. Bar fight, apparently." Josephine absorbed the news with surprising calm. Frank had become a ghost in her mind, someone from another life, another time. "Are you all right?" Dawson asked, watching her carefully. "Yes," she replied honestly. "I'm sorry for the life he chose, but he has no power over me anymore. Hasn't for years." Dawson nodded, pulling her closer. "You built something beautiful from those ashes, Josephine. This family, this life." "We built it," she corrected, resting her head on his shoulder. "That night, when I knocked on your door, I was at the end of everything. I had nothing left but Emma and desperation." "You had courage," Dawson countered. "More courage than anyone I've ever known." Josephine smiled, thinking of the frightened young woman she had been and the journey that had brought her here. "Love gives courage," she said simply. Your love gave me mine back." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the creaking of the swing beneath them. "I never imagined this," Dawson admitted after a while. "When I built this place, I thought it would just be me, alone with the seasons. Are you disappointed?" Josephine teased gently, knowing the answer. Dawson turned to her, his expression serious despite her light tone. "Josephine Reed, you and those children are the greatest blessing of my life. Every day, I thank God for the storm that brought you to my door." "Even though I had a black eye and a baby?" she asked, echoing a joke that had become something of a tradition between them. "Especially because of that," he replied, kissing her forehead. "It meant you needed me. And Lord knows, I needed you, I just didn't realize how much until you were here." Josephine lifted her face to his, their lips meeting in a kiss that held the comfort of familiarity and the enduring spark that had never diminished. "I love you, Dawson Reed," she whispered against his mouth. "Today and always." "And I love you," he replied, the words as heartfelt now as the first time he'd spoken them. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days were granted. Inside the house they had built together, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the Wyoming night cradled the homestead in its vast embrace. And between them, the love that had begun with an act of simple kindness continued to grow, as enduring as the mountains and as boundless as the western sky.